Good morning and welcome. I'm Raleigh Flynn, the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, and welcome to our program this morning. We're going to be talking about Ethiopia, the ongoing crisis in Ethiopia, and taking a look at whether there's any way to end this crisis with Tigray. We have a distinguished panel today here with us to talk about this, chaired by our Africa chair and former ambassador Charles Ray. He will be joined by Ambassador Aurelia Brazeal, Ambassador Henry Hank Cohen, and Ambassador David Shinn. Although I think most of you are familiar with Ambassador Ray, he was the former US ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and to the Republic of Zimbabwe. He also had a full 20-year career with the military before he joined the State Department. And now, as I mentioned before, he is chair of our Africa program. While I'm here, I'd also like to put in a plug. A week from today, same time, Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., we will be doing a program that will be analyzing the Kenyan national elections, which are taking place on August 9th, although because of the time zone, hopefully a few returns will be in and we'll be able to have at least some sort of full analysis of the Kenyan elections and why they matter. We will be taking your questions, so please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And you can go ahead and start doing that as it starts. Before I turn the reins over to Ambassador Ray, I'd also like to say thank you to our members and our supporters. We can't do this without you, and we are very, very grateful. We'll also have a map of Ethiopia and Tigray in the chat box if you would find that useful to orient yourself during this discussion. Ambassador Ray, please take it away.
And thank you all for joining us this morning. Most of you, if you've attended any of our Africa programs before, probably know them. Ambassador Brazeal and Ambassador Shinn were American ambassadors to Ethiopia, and Ambassador Cohen, who is known by many in the diplomatic community as Mr. Africa, was the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. They will present their views on the situation in Tigray in Ethiopia and their prognosis for where it will be going. I would like to reiterate what President Flynn said. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat so that we don't miss them. And with that, I would like to start with Ambassador Brazeal. Each will speak for about 3 minutes, and then we will have a little discussion and go to the audience for your questions. Thank you. Ambassador Brazeal.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray. I'm pleased to participate in today's session. The question I gather is there hope for an end to the crisis in Tigray? And being a diplomat, hope is the currency of diplomacy. So yes, there's always hope for an end. I think the last 4 months have shown that if you stop applying military pressure or military solutions to political problems, there's hope that people can organize on all sides in preparation for talks with each other. The Abe government has organized its group of people that are going to be possibly talking with the TPLF. The last report I saw, they said they were prepared to talk anywhere and with anyone. So perhaps the talks will be held, or initial talks might be held in Kenya after Kenya's election, which is this month in August. There are non-governmental voices in Ethiopia that are speaking up in Ethiopia and outside of Ethiopia, speaking up about the need to sort of unlock the silent majority of people who they feel are not disposed to hate each other, but to find ways to live together, as has been the tradition in Ethiopia. So there are calls there for conferences, for people to come together to encourage the silent majority to speak out and to expand the political discourse to counterbalance the more extremist voices that are out there, and to move away from the sort of historical Unitarian governance of Ethiopia versus what some people are calling a tribalistic framework, but I call it a regional framework. So there are those voices that are speaking up as well to try to suggest ways of the silent majority to enter into a dialogue to find peace. So we've just had the US Special Envoy in Ethiopia to talk to the different parties and encourage talks. So, and we've had other diplomatic entities meeting together with the government to get briefed. And also there's the caucus of opposition parties that contains 10 parties that have been that have met with foreign diplomats in Addis to talk about their desires. So I think if we keep our eye on not only Tigray, but also the entire country of Ethiopia and what is happening there, as well as some of the regional aspects, I think there is a possibility we can move beyond the crisis in Tigray. So that's my view, and I'll be interested in the questions that come from the audience.
Thank you, Ambassador Shinn.
Yes, thank you very much. And I agree with Ambassador Brazeal that there is a possible path to peace today, whereas 6 months ago, frankly, I did not see any path to peace. So that alone is a move in the right direction. I think that there are three immediate hurdles to overcome. I think they can be overcome, although this has not yet happened. The first is the need for a formal ceasefire. There's more or less a de facto ceasefire between the forces in Tigray and the central government forces at the moment, which is a good thing, but it needs to become a formal ceasefire. Second is that both sides need to express the willingness to move forward without any preconditions. As Ambassador Brazeal said, that has happened in the last 48 hours in the case of the central government. Now the TPLF has to make similar kinds of guarantees. And third, there needs to be a decision on who's going to mediate this process. Up until now, the government, central government side has focused on the African Union, and the TPLF has focused on President Kenyatta in Kenya. And there still is no agreement on which one, if either one, is going to be selected. So these are fairly significant obstacles, but all of them are capable of being overcome. And if one can deal with those concerns, I think it will really improve the prospects for moving this process forward. Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you, Ambassador Cohen. You're still muted. There you go. Oh, now you're muted again. There you go.
I disagree. I have no optimism about any solution in Tigray. Historically, Ethiopia has always had strong central governments with no power out in the provinces, except for a brief period, I think 1952 to 62, when Eritrea was in a federation but the rest of the time, strong central government is what Ethiopia has already wanted. And in this case, I can't see the central government accepting semi-independence of the TPLF. And the TPLF, after 25 years in power, are not going to accept a situation in Tigray where they have nothing to do except, vote in the government. They have an international border. They want to be able to be free to trade with the rest of the world and to do their own thing. And they will not accept total control from Addis Ababa. And of course, the Amhara, who are, the descendants of Menelik I, they will not accept that they are not in power totally. The Amhara are related to the Tutsi in Burundi and Rwanda ethnically. And the motto in those countries is the Tutsi are condemned to rule. And it's the same thing in Ethiopia. The Amhara are condemned to rule. And I can't see them accepting a TPLF that is semi-independent in their own Tigray province. And I believe that Abiy now has become an Amhara nationalist, and he's surrounded by hardliner Amhara. So I'm pessimistic about Tigray.
Okay, well, that sets it up for an interesting conversation. Before we go to the audience questions, I have a couple of questions of my own I'd like to bounce off of you. This first one, I recently read some unsubstantiated reports on the use of starvation as a weapon in Tigray. Have not been able to get any verification of this from any credible sources. But do you think there's any credibility to these reports that the opposing forces are using food supplies for the civilian population as a weapon in their operations? Let's just start in the same order we went. Ree, David,
Okay.
and then Hank, you back clean up.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie. I think our Senate, the U.S. Senate, I think passed a bipartisan resolution around July 20th. If I'm not very good on dates, condemning the weaponization of hunger as a weapon of war, saying that destruction of agricultural abilities and disrupting the market systems contribute to the weaponization of hunger. I don't know if that exactly coincides with, I think, what the World Food Program also said in July, where they announced that they had averted famine in Tigray. Averting famine is all good, but it's a technical term, and that there are people still starving in Tigray because of the inability to move food out from major centers. So I don't know if I'd say that officially starving people in Tigray was an official policy of the Abe government or any group, but certainly hunger exists because of the inability to move food into Tigray because of the fighting, the inability for people to get their money out of banks to buy food, what food there was, and also the use of the fact that fuel was being denied to Tigray region because that could be used militarily in the fighting, and you need fuel to move the trucks into Tigray that would have the food. So yes, there's starvation that has to be addressed. It has to be addressed, but it also exists in other parts of Ethiopia. And that's why I said you look at the Tigray region, but also look at the country as a whole. And there's a humanitarian need for food that needs to be addressed by both the Ethiopian government and all of the donor community.
I would add to that if you look at it from the standpoint of the Tigrayan side, I'm not sure that they were really ever in much of a position to use food as a weapon of starvation, unless, of course, they starved their own people, and there would be absolutely no interest in doing that I can see. The allegation generally came against the central government of Ethiopia and starving the Tigrayan people by disrupting the flow of humanitarian trucks into Tigray region. So I think there perhaps was a point in time where one could make that argument. But I would point out that since the resumption of the humanitarian convoys on April 1 of this year, some 4,308 trucks have arrived in Tigray's capital of Mekelle as of July 19. So there's been a significant improvement in the movement of humanitarian supplies into Tigray region. And I don't think the argument that starvation is being used as a tool of war carries a great deal of water today.
I would agree. I would agree with David that at one point there were interruptions of convoys going into Tigray. There were credible U.S. government sources telling us that, but I think lately the government has relented and has allowed everything to go through. So I don't think starvation is an issue anymore.
Okay, thank you.
I have to jump in, Charlie. I think, again, it's a matter of moving food out of Mekelle and other centers into the rural areas that's a problem still. And I would also say that the issue is not a matter of humanitarian aid for Tigray. It's the fact that in the war, fields were uprooted, markets were disrupted, land was polluted. So you could say that was all intentional to deny Tigray the fact that it was self-sustaining in many areas, including partially in agriculture and feeding its own people.
My next question is, what has been done or what can be done about foreign actors? For instance, of course, China, who has been providing the drones that the UAE has given to the central government. What can be done influence in Ethiopia? Let's do it in reverse. Hank, start with you, then David, then Bree.
I didn't get the question. You were breaking up. Could you give it to us again?
Can be done to mitigate the negative impact of countries like the UAE and Iran and Eritrea in this conflict?
Well, I think the U.S. should put pressure on them in any way we can to get them to stay out of it and let the Ethiopians settle it themselves. I think we have some influence in Eritrea, but for the rest, I think it's minimal.
David?
Yeah, you have different issues occurring here. You mentioned drones, and there are drones in Ethiopia from both China and Turkey, also apparently from Iran. And the ones that are from China, it's not clear whether they were provided by the UAE or through some other source, but they were being used at one point in Tigray because there is a de facto ceasefire. My understanding is that is not occurring today. So for the time being anyway, that doesn't seem to be a significant problem. There are, as I understand it, still some Eritrean forces inside the borders of Tigray. It may be a fairly minimal amount of territory that they're occupying, but they clearly need to be ordered out. It's in the first instance, up to the government, the central government in Addis Ababa, to make it clear that they are no longer welcome anywhere in Ethiopia. And it's up probably to the Tigrayan forces to forcibly remove them at some point. But this has never been a helpful engagement by Eritrea, and the international players in all of this need to continue to put pressure on Eritrea to get out of Ethiopia.
Ree?
I couldn't agree more. The pressure needs to remain to get all Eritrean forces out of Ethiopia. And I also understand there are still some in Ethiopia. I think the government expressed willingness now to talk to the, to have talks with the TPLF or the TDF has signaled to certain forces in the Amhara region who are very hardlined against Tigray that perhaps the government is softening its stance. So there's movement within Ethiopia in terms of which groups think they're being supported by the Abe government. And there's some churn there, including whether Abe and Isaias are still working together smoothly. So I think there's a lot of churn going on internally.
Okay, thank you. Mention was made of Kenya as being the venue for the talks between the Tigrayan elections are scheduled for next week, and Kenya has an unfortunate history of their elections being followed by a period of strife.
You're freezing, Charlie.
Right. What do you think should the Kenyan election turn violent, and there's turmoil in Kenya? What do you think the impact of that will be on the prospects for peace talks in Ethiopia, between Ethiopia and Tigray? Ree?
I don't think there would be any impact if there's unsettled conditions in Kenya after the election. I think that the venue of using Kenya could still be considered viable.
David?
I guess I'm a little more pessimistic on this point. I think a lot would depend upon how severe the violence is, how long it goes on, where it's taking place. I can foresee where Kenya might still be a possibility for a venue, but I can also see where if there really were serious problems in Kenya, that it would not work out. It all depends upon the circumstances of the aftermath of the elections. And frankly, I'm hopeful that these elections will end peacefully in Kenya.
Yeah, I think they'll end peacefully, and I think Kenyatta will be able to handle it. He'd be an excellent mediator, in my view.
Okay, well, thank you to three of you. And because we have a history of not being able to get to all of the audience questions, because I asked too many, I'm going to turn it over now to President Flynn to moderate the questions from our audience. And I see we have quite a few, 15 in fact. President Flynn.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray, and thank you to our ambassadors for a really interesting and illuminating discussion. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A box, as well as a lot of comments, I might add. I'm going to start with, there are several that pertain to the issue of democracy. And so this is sort of a three-part question. I also have to say that my internet connection today does not seem very stable. So I hope it will come through. But let me just go through the three main questions I hear. One is, don't you all think it is up to the people of Tigray to choose their leader? Question mark. Then we have another one that says, are the current leaders on both sides capable of making peace, or must there be leadership changes to achieve resolution? And in terms of, I would add to that, leadership changes, is there a mechanism for doing that even? Is that a possibility? And finally, a question that asks, why is the basic issue of democratic legitimacy so totally absent from your reflections? So perhaps because we just didn't get to it, but I will throw that one out there too. So who would like to take a stab at one or more of those questions? David?
I haven't led off, so why don't you lead off?
Well, let me make a couple of comments. And in terms of the first question, shouldn't the people of Tigray determine their own leader? Sure, of course they should. There obviously has to be a process for doing this. There actually was a process that took place prior to the outbreak of the civil war in November of 2020, when there were regional elections in Tigray, and the TPLF won, at least according to their account, pretty handily. There were opposition candidates who did not perform all that well. We didn't have international observers on the scene, so we don't know whether there were any imperfections in the election or not. But the fact is, there was an election, and there presumably could be elections again in Tigray. No one is suggesting that's not a possibility. So the answers to that one, I think, is easy. As far as why doesn't democracy play a greater role in all of these discussions, I think the primary goal for the moment is to, one, get the fighting stopped, both de facto and formally, and to be sure that the humanitarian assistance is moving into Tigray, to rebuild, to move forward with the creation of normal government services in Tigray and those other parts of Ethiopia where they have been destroyed. It's not just Tigray where you've had destruction. And I'm not sure what that has to do directly with democracy, but if you can't get these basic things done first, I don't see an awful lot of hope for democracy. There's one sort of elephant in the room here that we haven't talked about, and which I don't have a good answer for, and that is the absence out of public view of Abiy Ahmed in recent weeks. No one seems to be quite sure where he is or what he is up to, and the decisions in recent weeks have all been made, seem to have been made by Demeke Mekonnen, the deputy prime minister. So it is curious that this is happening, and I don't know if any of the other members of the panel can shed light on this, but it is an open question.
Well, I don't think you can have democracy in Tigray. I think that it's a joke to think of that. The leadership of the TPLF, they live in a gated community in Adwa, and they're stealing the province blind. And I can't see them accepting democracy. It means that they're going to be out of power.
Interesting.
Well, I would also, I don't, it's hard to divine recent or statements by Prime Minister Abe recently. But I would say that he's been telling people, to the people of Ethiopia writ large, that this isn't a big issue, that they should just hang on, things will get better. I don't know if that reflects the Prosperity Party's philosophy or his own personal orientation, but I would feel more comfortable if the Prime Minister understands that the Tigray issue is a symptom of the larger issue of Ethiopia and its future orientation. The Constitution, I can't imagine many regions would give up, is it Article 29 of the Constitution or 39 that allows for succession if they're going to stay together. So I'd sort of like for him to see the issues in a broader way than his public statements seem to intimate, which is that this is an isolated issue that can be handled separately. I note that the Southern Nations region had recently, I think just this week or last week, the people there, groups of people there have come up with an idea for 2 more referendum votes to form regional states within the southern region. So there's a lot happening in the country writ large in terms of people not wanting to give up their regional abilities to operate semi-independently from the central government.
We have actually a lot of questions that comment on the humanitarian disaster and also the lack of access in Tigray to electricity, bank accounts, salaries, medical care. And many of these questionnaires lay that directly at the feet of the Ethiopians and question, isn't this a violation of basic human rights? And is it time to start building a case and prosecuting war crimes? I don't know if someone would like to take that.
Well, let me jump in again, Raleigh, on the question of humanitarian access. Clearly, there has to be unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray, and a lot of people, particularly the international community, has been saying that for many, many months. But my understanding is that to a considerable degree, that is happening today. There is much more movement of necessary supplies into Tigray. The bigger problem is the restoration of normal services in Tigray. And I realize that the TPLF has said, well, we really can't begin talks with the central government until those are restored. That's all well and good, but I don't think that's very realistic. It's going to take many, many months to restore a lot of these services. It's not something that you can snap your fingers and all of a sudden it happens. So there has to be progress towards reestablishing regular government services, but to suggest that all of these must be in place before there can be meaningful talks, I just don't think is very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you, David, and that it's not realistic as preconditions for even talking, that it will take time. I would add fertilizer also into the needs of people up there, along with telecommunications and fuel and banking and medicine. But I see those areas as promising for sort of confidence building steps that could be taken. And I would hope that when there's the initial ice-breaking talks that do take place, if they take place, they can talk about confidence building measures. And these categories to me are good
One
ones.
of the things I don't think we've really touched on is what the impact, if any, is on the situation of the crisis in Ukraine and Russia, have the global food and supply chain and fuel shortages affected this region, and if not yet, are they going to?
Well, fertilizer, I think, has affected the greater Horn of Africa. The lack of accessibility to fertilizer has sent the price of fertilizer up very high. I know in Kenya, for example. So it's affected the region as a whole. In terms of food, I don't know the percentage of food that the countries in the Horn of Africa get out of Ukraine or even Russia, but there has to be, given the worldwide impact of the Ukrainian situation, there has to be an impact on the Horn.
I think in addition to the problem of Ukraine, probably even more important is climate change. Drought is really bad in Somalia and parts of Ethiopia and Sudan. And this will require imported food more than they usually take.
Mm-hmm.
Russian invasion of Ukraine has had a significant impact upon the export of grain to the Horn of Africa, more so countries like Somalia than, to some extent, Ethiopia also. The bigger question is whether it's had any impact, particularly on Tigray, and I don't know the answer to that. I think the problem in Tigray has rather been the whole question of getting anything in there until recently. I'm not sure that the Ukraine per se has had that much of an impact. But the disruption of grain movements and fertilizer movements as a result of the war clearly has negatively impacted the entire Horn of Africa.
Yeah, as I'm looking at these questions, there seems to be different perceptions of what exactly is going on the ground. And one of our audience asked the question, what's the best news source? And I'm just curious, how do you find out ground truth of what is really happening on the ground, particularly in Tigray?
Well, that's a good question. I think we all are sort of tripping over that. I did check, for example, this morning, the latest edition of the Ethiopian Reporter, which is an English and Amharic language newspaper out of Addis Ababa, that tends to have a degree of neutrality to it. At least it tackles some of the tough subjects. And one of those that it covered today, for example, was the invasion of Somali region of Ethiopia by Al-Shabaab out of Somalia. Pretty controversial subject, but it had a very, very good story on that. I didn't see anything that shed much light on the situation in Tigray, and that's the problem area. You just don't have international press in Tigray, and I'm not sure there are very many Ethiopian reporters there.
Yeah.
That's true. It's very difficult to get solid information. So you talk to many people and look at lots of publications and stories.
Yeah. A question about the Ethiopian public. As this war continues on, and we're now at what are we, a year and a half into this? Is that right? I'm trying to calculate. What does the Ethiopia public feel about that? Are they still supportive of the government and what it's doing in Tigray, or is war weariness setting in? And plus, what's the impact on the average Ethiopian?
Well, I think the impact on the average Ethiopian is considerable in terms of inflationary pressures, difficulty accessing certain products on the market. And that was what I meant by whether the government and Prime Minister Abe themselves see the issue as a national issue or as something isolated. And I worry that they are not viewing the issue with Tigray. They're viewing it as a very sort of separate, isolated, smaller issue as opposed to a national issue or even regional issue. But yeah, the people are being affected. As I said, their voices now speaking up who are not part of the government about the silent majority, and the silent majority is written out to be people who support peace, not extremism. There's been intermarrying in Ethiopia a lot, so that people are generally, the silent majority is considered to be peace-seeking people.
Yeah.
Who do not support the government.
Well, I think to the extent that we see the TPLF exercising more and more power independent of the central government, I think the other ethnic groups are getting jealous, specifically the Oromo. You have the Oromo Liberation Front, and I think to the extent that the TPLF has independent power, I think the Oromos will want the same or even more, because they are the most populous ethnic group in Ethiopia. I call it it's the turn of the Oromo to eat.
Raleigh, I have seen no reliable public opinion polls since the Civil War broke out. So we don't have anything sort of tangible to go by unless one is on the ground there interacting with the Ethiopians and getting their view over an extended period of time. I'm always reluctant to comment on what the local folks think, because sitting here in Washington, I frankly don't know.
Yeah, and just in terms of sort of, moms at home, how many Ethiopians are actually being deployed in this, and are, how much carnage is there, candidly, and if not, if it's mostly being waged as an air war, is it that aspect affecting the Ethiopians?
Well, I'm not sure about the moms in Ethiopia in terms of their ability to affect anything or how many people are involved, but no, we haven't mentioned the diaspora yet, and I wanted to mention the diaspora, at least from the US point of view. There are people who have quite extremist views in the diaspora in the US, as well as those who are considered more moderate and part of that silent majority. And so that you have people who are comfortably living in the US, but still agitating for fighting or hatred of one group or another coming out of the diaspora into Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about spillover to the neighborhood? Some of the neighboring countries, what's the impact there? And if negative, can those neighbors somehow help to resolve this crisis, be motivated to?
Well, there certainly has been spillover into the neighboring countries of Ethiopia. We saw very early on the flow of some 65,000 Ethiopian refugees into Sudan. That helped to exacerbate a long-standing border dispute between Sudan and Ethiopia. Then the government forces took over Western Tigray and basically cut off the movement of Tigrayans into Sudan. So that ended that particular issue. You had the Eritrean troops moving into Tigray, creating all kinds of problems and basically resulting in a mini war between Tigrayans and Eritreans. I mentioned earlier today the movement of Al-Shabaab into Somali region of Ethiopia. That probably would not have happened a year and a half ago, when you had a very strong Ethiopian National Defense Force, intelligence operation, and central government that was on top of that problem. But I think its strengths have been diluted as a result of this civil war, which has resulted in Al-Shabaab taking advantage of the situation. And one could go on with various implications of this civil war, mainly in a negative way, as to what is happening throughout the region.
Any other comments on that? I think governance of border areas is always really important. And yeah, if they're being distracted and not doing that, that is concerning. One of the, I can't believe we've had an event and it hasn't come up, but COVID. What is the status of COVID in Ethiopia and Tigray? Do we know? And how is that affecting the situation? Or is it just minor compared to the tragedy of what's going on?
I've not seen anything about COVID. I don't know, but I do know that the medical infrastructure in Tigray has been destroyed in the war, that health clinics, hospitals were either looted or destroyed or staff driven off, so that the medical services in Tigray are not of the caliber they were before the war, and there are few supplies. a more optimistic view, one could say is that because of PEPFAR and the fact that the US has helped with the infrastructure on HIV/AIDS, that many countries, not only in Ethiopia, but other countries in Africa, are accustomed to monitoring and trying to address and identify early outbreaks of various diseases. And so that there at least is that human capacity that still exists to a certain degree, but I have no information on COVID in Tigray or even around Ethiopia per se.
It's interesting, Raleigh. I think that COVID mercifully has had much less of a negative impact on Africa than it has in many parts of the world, and including Ethiopia. Now, there are various theories about this. Some argue that, well, Africa is a younger population, therefore it's better positioned to deal with COVID than older populations. It's a population that tends not to be as overweight as a lot of the more developed populations in the world, and that may have had an impact. There are a lot of interesting theories running around about this, but the fact is that COVID was not the huge threat to the continent that I thought everyone thought it was going to be at the beginning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So, is there a role for the United States or some of the other, big countries, both in Africa and beyond, to try to resolve this? And if you were counseling the American foreign policy establishment, what would you be telling them to be doing? Ambassador Cohen, would you like to grab that one?
I think we would have to encourage them to engage in talks, the TPLF with the government. I think that's the only way to get a solution.
And how do you get them to do that? I'm not the Americans, but get them to the table.
Well, I think the both sides have indicated they are excuse me, inching toward talks, and the ice-breaking talks are expected to take place, I thought, in Kenya after the Kenyan election. But I think Ethiopians have to solve this issue. It's an Ethiopian solution that would have to come forward, and friends of Ethiopia and donors of Ethiopia can continue to encourage people to choose political solutions to political problems and not military solutions to political problems, and simply keep pushing the parties, hopefully, to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. There is a way forward, I hope.
Yeah.
The U.S. Horn of Africa Special Envoy Mike Hammer, the third in just over a year's period of time, was recently in Addis Ababa. The main item on his agenda today, as I understand it, is the situation in Ethiopia, particularly the civil war between the Tigrayans and the central government. He clearly made a point in these initial discussions in Addis Ababa to continue to put pressure on the government, in this case, Demeke Mekonnen, the deputy prime minister, because Abiy Ahmed is not in public view in recent weeks. It remains to be seen how much impact his efforts will have. There are other special envoys and representatives who are doing the same thing, from the European Union, from Great Britain, from the African Union, from the United Nations. They're all engaged in trying to push the various parties in Ethiopia to engage. It's a little bit harder to do that with the Tigrayans because I'm not sure they're getting to Mekelle in order to have direct interaction with the Tigrayans. But I think that process, that effort has to continue.
Yeah. We have an interesting comment. We have a lot of interesting comments, and but one of them compares this to the fate of Biafra, where so many civilians perished with a blockade similar to what is happening today in Tigray. And my question is this: can we look back at what other crises have occurred on the continent and compare and contrast? And is there anything we can learn from those past crises to help us resolve this one, which at the moment seems almost unresolvable?
I would say, yes, there probably are other episodes on the continent, but I'd say that it's not just exclusively on the continent of Africa, but worldwide, how issues have been solved. I can think of examples also in Latin America that might come to fore in terms of whose territory is this, but it usually comes with more, it would be between Sudan and Ethiopia, but there are ways to resolve, are ways to think about issues, I think, that come out of Latin America that strike me as relevant. So I think hopefully the world and diplomats will use all of their collective knowledge to push people forward to talk. But there are a lot of issues to solve that have to do not just with Tigray and the central government, but with all of Ethiopia and how different regional states are looking at the issue themselves. And I should point out there's also hunger, famine, drought, and violence in other parts of Ethiopia, not just in Tigray.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Ray on that. I think it is important to look at examples, not just from Africa, but from other parts of the world. And, Biafra may offer some useful ideas on this. Some would say perhaps even Rwanda does. But this is really the job of a skilled mediator and the mediator's team. They are going to need support in order to look at some of these examples to see what might be useful from borrowing from other examples. And I think it's important not to get bogged down in looking at past examples. It's important to focus on the current situation. But if one can make some useful decisions based on the past, all to the better.
Yeah. Ambassador Cohen?
There are non-government connected Ethiopians, at least in this country, who consider themselves either elders or just simply part of the non-governmental population out there interested in peace in their own country, who are speaking up and have ideas as well. So hopefully they will be listened to at some point.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't underestimate the ability of the US to influence things. I'm thinking of 1998. There was a major civil war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And there were foreign governments on each side of the fighting. But the United States stepped in and said, we want everyone to meet with us in Geneva. And everybody came. And they hashed things out and came to a solution. So I think the United States is being too timid. I think we should exercise the influence that we enjoy in the world.
I think we're coming close to an end, and I would invite each of you to make a final comment and for our audience. And this has been sort of a freewheeling discussion. There are so many aspects to this, but please, Ambassador Shinn, would you like to start?
Sure. I think it's really important that the Ethiopians, both the central government and the Tigrayans, take advantage of what I said at the beginning and still believe is something of an opening for breaking through this terribly negative period in Ethiopian history that was destined to perhaps torpedo all the progress the country had made in recent decades. and to just do everything possible to try to make this peace process work. I know there are different points of view as to whether the prospects are that high, and I can be fairly skeptical myself from time to time, but this is, the table has been partially set. And if both sides or even one side does not take advantage of this, it's just a missed opportunity for the people of Ethiopia.
I would like to, I think I endorse what Ambassador Shinn just said, and it's an opportunity. I think that if hate talk could be moderated both from outside Ethiopia and inside Ethiopia, that would be helpful if there's a way to either moderate the hate talk or counter it with moderate positions or moderate people who can talk as well. That would be helpful so that population, the general population can engage itself more in what's going to happen.
I would say that the Tigray problem tells me that what Ethiopia needs is a national dialogue. What kind of government do they want? Do they want a strong central government, or do they want a weak central government where each of the regions or provinces exercises the maximum power? I think if they don't get to that point, there'll be continuous, there'll be more Tigrays as we go.
Thank you to all of you. A fascinating discussion about a tragic situation. Ambassador Ray, thank you also for hosting this program. To our audience, a reminder, we will be back here a week from now, 10 a.m. Eastern time, to talk about the national elections in Kenya. I'd also like to let you know, we will be announcing, so stay tuned, those of you who get our emails. Probably Thursday or Friday, we're going to be doing an event on the strategic impact of the attack against Ayman al-Zawahiri in Afghanistan and our terrorism community as well, and counterterrorism operations. So stay tuned. We will be announcing the time of that. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to all of you, but especially our panelists for coming today. That was a superb discussion. And to our members and supporters, we look forward to seeing you on future events. Do check us out on www.fpri.org. We have lots of interesting articles and reports for you to read. Goodbye.